feel free to speak.
Okay. Good afternoon. We're here today to hear from the trucking industry on issues related to the Maritime Data Initiative. Actually, we're going to call it the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative, broaden it, make sure all of the modes are covered. But we've asked a number of drayage trucking company representatives to consider questions that we submitted to them to provide insight on issues related to congestion, to the information that they need to do their business better, to assess where there's gaps and where we can do better, and generally collect their views on the state of trucking. This is an area that is incredibly critical right now. I believe that people do not understand the value of the industry, the importance. Really, we can pretty effectively get cargo across the ocean, and we can get it into the terminal. But our challenge really has been finding a way to move it from the terminal out to its ultimate destination. And we have an extremely complex system of transportation. And if we don't have adequate drayage trucking, we will continue to run into congestion issues in the future. I'm concerned that the status right now in the industry and the levels of congestion are making it more difficult to find drivers that are driving people from the market. So I'm interested to hear from our participants today about that. But I wanted to start off with a little bit about then and now. And I entered this industry 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. And it was very different from where we are today. And some of those changes have created increasing challenges in this market. And I feel that we really need to do a better job for the drayage companies that are integral in the movement of these cargoes. But 30 years ago, when I started, there were more than 20 major ocean carriers operating in international commerce in the United States. And not one of them had, there may have been one or two that had just over 4% market share. So there was a number of competitors. The carriers operated, for the most part, their own terminals. So they owned their own terminals, and they owned the equipment, the intermodal equipment that was used. So you used to pull up into the port complex and get your chassis there. So it was a much easier system of service because of the system that was then in place. Ship sizes were substantially less. I think 4,000 to 6,000 TEUs at that time was the regular one, and I think the ports of LA, Long Beach, our major entry point in the United States, were carrying anywhere between 4 to 5 million TEUs of cargo each year. And so today we have eight major carriers involved in international ocean shipping, with market shares of between 12 and 20, for at least half of them between market shares of 12 and 20%. Three major shipping alliances sharing space on each other's vessels in terms of operations. Most of the terminals are independently operated now. There are some companies that have ownership interests in it, but they're now disconnected for the most part from the ocean carriers. Intermodal equipment is now a combination of owned by the industry, pooled together, and privately pooled together, and is diffused in a far greater way. Vessel sizes have gone from 4,000 to 6,000 to 24,000 TEUs in LA. So a vessel coming into LA discharging cargo containers would have a cargo line of trucks going to Las Vegas before the last container got off. That gives you a magnitude of the size that we're talking about, the scope. we're basically now in LA Long Beach projecting that we'll have over 20 million cargo containers. So the volume of cargo coming into the country is astronomically increased over time, and the complexity of the system has also been enormous in terms of the actors that are involved and the players that need to function. So today we're going to start off the process of listening to the industry, finding out what they need to do their jobs better in terms of information, data. I read a report today. Let's see, it's Four Kites State of Ocean Freight Operations. It was a review by 160 major shipping companies, and they said their largest frustration was that 35% of them estimated was that they were dealing with manual processes still. So they were dealing with paper and data entry points. And frankly, this is just not acceptable at this juncture in time that we can't move forward. So we want to hear from the trucking industry. We're here to listen to you, ask some questions. Dr. Monaco and I will both be asking some questions. So I'm going to divide it up. We'll do a panel of 3, and then me ask some questions, and then the last 2 participants will do that. This is a public live meeting, and only the participants that we've invited are authorized to speak and can get permission to speak. But we are soliciting information, questions, comments from the public in general as a result of this. We will be posting everything publicly. So if you have comments, we have a internet site available, internet address for comments, Maritime data at fmc.gov. And so please submit any comments, suggestions, and reference please the date of the event. This is the first event that we're holding in this area, but we anticipate as the new year starts that we will be doing 1 or 2 a week with all of the different segments that are involved in the intermodal transportation of cargo through our ports. So, gentlemen, you should be honored to be the leadoff guests in this. As we work our way through comments from the industry, our intent is to develop some recommendations that we will present at a data summit in the spring on ways that we can do the more efficient movement of cargo through our ports, and what sort of technology policies related to the technology should be considered. And so with that, I think on my list we've got 5 company executives. Michael Keeney, I guess, Executive Vice President, Port City Logistics. Will Connell, President of Gulf Intermodal Services. Jarrett Cooper, President of BW Mitchum Trucking Company. Tom Heingartner, Chief Executive Officer, Best Transportation. And Eric Wright, Vice President of the Washington Trucking Association. It's a good cross-section from around the country. And I'd ask, as they start off, we'd intended to have their bios available on the screen, but we'll have to individually provide those to the attendees of the meeting afterwards. So we've had technical challenges on that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael to give his presentation, and look forward to the testimony, the observations provided by the rest of the participants. Michael?
Sure. I don't have a presentation on any slides prepared, but I think what I can say. What did you want us to do, Carl? Just work through kind of the topic sequentially. Yeah.
Just your observations. We're interested in hearing from how the congestion's impacted you and the questions that we sent out.
Yeah, I think what's,
hey, Carl,
what I would say that's most interesting.
Yep.
Hey, Carl, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, this is John Young. So I just want to add one other participant on there. Robert Loya from California is also on the call.
Okay.
I did want to say, just in terms of how we've discussed this, I've discussed this with each of the participants. You have a list of questions. If you could just kind of go through, follow the questions, and then we'll kind of move through the line that way. So no presentation, just answer.
Well, it's I'm okay with that presentation. So go ahead and start, Michael.
Yeah, sure. So we operate primarily in the Port of Savannah, and a little bit in Charleston in the Southeast, right? So, our perspective may be different from some of those in other ports, is what I've noticed. It seems like there's a kind of a global narrative around congestion and chassis issues, right? Big words that people like to use. But it seems like every port has very unique challenges. And so what I would say my observation is there isn't one thing, right? It's death by 1,000 cuts, right? You've got skilled labor problems. We also operate 9 buildings in Savannah, right? So we're really looking at everything from 100 drivers that gate the port a couple hundred times a day in Savannah. We run a third-party business that does equal that amount or more. And we run 9 buildings where we're operating and transloading and doing everything else. And then we're running full truckload transportation all the way into the middle mile. So, we see skilled labor problems and data problems really throughout the supply chain. And what I would say is it seems for us, like if I can get it into my ecosystem, I can generally do a pretty good job. But as you alluded to earlier, there's not a lot of standards around how BCOs and forwarders and people share and exchange information, right? So the challenge is getting way bills or delivery orders from Fortune 100 companies and emails, right? And then we have to track these things in several platforms, many of which have no good public APIs to automate. So I'm trying to figure out, when is a vessel slipping? When is it coming? Why is it on customs hold? Then the customer's in demurrage. And so what you have is a ton of manual tracking before I can even begin to optimize my fleet, right? So that when you look at key data elements integral to our operation, I just accurately need to know when a box is going to be ready. Like really that simple. But the problem is so many things change, right? A vessel slips, or it's coming to Savannah and the customer calls and says, well, they sent it to Charleston because of congestion. So every time we begin to plan drivers to be optimal, right? 5 little things change that change everything, right? So we could pre-dispatch a guy the night before with 7 dispatches, and then it's on customs hold, and we have to redo the whole morning, right? Does that make sense? And so when you look at data, I need to know the vessel name. I need to know, when it's going to come, where it's going to come, and I just need that to not change. And if it changes, I need that proactively, right? Or I need it to be automated. Right now, I have to pay humans to manually track 4 or 5 different things. The forwarder doesn't know, the BCO doesn't know, and they rely on us to go figure that out for them, which we want to do. We want to give them a good experience as a kind of 3PL, 4PL, but it's manual, right?
What do you, Michael? Sorry to interrupt, but we may work our way through this format as we do it. What is your timing requirements for getting information to stage your drivers and your equipment? When do you need information prior to pickup?
Yeah, so typically to dispatch, right, you want things to be fairly consistent 24 to 36 hours out. Much more than that, like you really can't, I don't care what anybody says, you really can't plan for labor, because if you have 100 drivers, maybe 85 show up to work. I mean, that's just kind of what we deal with. But what I would say is we typically know our volumes projected a couple of weeks out, because these things are on the water. It's not like we don't know they're coming, right? But it's what happens is when a customer forecasts certain things and then they change, it's the constant changes that change what's happening with your fleet, right? And then you have a very competitive labor market, and drivers are becoming more transient as they're kind of chasing signing bonuses and chasing different things. Does that make sense? So it's even if you have time, it's the changes that occur. Like you think you know what's coming, and then it changes, right? A shipper will say, I'm going to have this coming, and then another carrier drops the ball or something changes with the forwarder, and they call and go, well, I actually need you to get 30 more per day, or they're going to be sitting in demurrage. And so you're trying to scramble and figure out how to help a customer. So I think you have plenty of time because these things are on the water. That's what fascinates me about this part of the business, is this stuff's on the water. Like, it's coming. It's not like, it's not like a truckload. But it's the inconsistency with the ports and the data that make it a problem.
How much does the changes reflect the BCO versus the? Do they sometimes notify you? No, by the way, I need 10 additional. Is there delays on both sides of the equation, or is it primarily on the ocean side and the terminal side?
So it seems to be a constant. I don't know if this is the right word, but it seems to be a bit of a game between the BCO, the forwarder, and the steamship line, where like we had a major customer that all of a sudden their contract with the steamship line changed. A lot of what we're managing is free time, last free days, right? You have X amount of boxes in the port. You want to get those out before last free day. So a lot of what we're managing is time on the port, time out of the port, time in our building. We're trying to go fast and manage time, right? When volumes go way up. When contracts change in terms of free days, or when something gets in customs hold, or when something's on hold and we don't know why, and the steamship line and the BCO are just going back and forth emailing, we're waiting. That could be 15, 20, 30 dispatches in a day, right? That's 5-6 drivers. So I think it's a balance between those three parties. And I wish I could tell you, Carl, but it's never one thing.
Okay. So, but you think 24 hours notice is really what you'd need to be able to at least most efficiently stage your workforce?
Yeah, our fleet is pre-dispatched 24 hours in advance. But we're typically, we're trying to demand plan and hire 2 weeks out. So I typically should know how many local drayage moves within Savannah that I have 2 weeks from today. I should know that.
And who do you get your information from in terms of is it the steamship line itself or the port authority? Is it, because they're an operating port in Savannah. So who tells you when the cargo is ready for pickup?
So we get information from either directly from the BCO or from their forwarder. And then we use those container numbers and we track in GPA's website on our own. So if we can get a delivery order and a container number, we then electronically track that on our own in Savannah and Charleston and are watching the status of that vessel.
Okay. And what is their system? What does the Port Authority system have? That it does, what sort of status does it give you with respect to the container explicitly?
I don't live in it day to day, but I can tell you, like, we know if the vessel slips, if a box is on customs hold, or what particular status it is. It's pretty. I know from the GPA's website, it's pretty detailed. We kind of know exactly what's going on with it, and then it's just a matter of if something changes, we've got to go figure out why, or escalate that issue to the forward or the BCO to figure out what's going on with that vessel or what's going on with that box.
But there could be multiple sources for the same information, is what you're saying, though.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you get it from the BCO, the NVOCC, a forwarder, and then at other times you might get it from a different source directly from the Port Authority, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that complex?
I don't know that it's complex in that it's just too many people communicating the same thing. I came up in the transportation world before I ever got involved in maritime. And, once something was in a building, it was in a WMS, it was in an ERP, and you're building shipments and there's a ready date and an appointment date, and it becomes fairly straightforward. It's going through an EDI process or an API or something like that. I've only been involved in this for a couple of years. And what I've noticed is there's just multiple parties trying to transmit the same data. And like you mentioned, chassis pools. Well, now I got to go find a chassis. Is it on a port chassis? Am I going to use my chassis? Another piece of data that's really critical for an operator is there available empties to go get things. So let's say we had a really good week and we got things out of the port. If I can't get those empty, if the warehouse can't take them, if the customer can't take them, if something changes on that side, I now have no empties to go back. Right. So my mix.
So you have to, So you have to, sorry about this. You have to balance empties and chassis with everything that you do for pickup, basically.
Yep. Mm-hmm. We're really trying to optimize for three things, right? Trailing equipment utilization, the truck and keeping it seated, and then trying to figure out what's going to go on with inbound container demand, what's changing. Right? And then there's multiple factors that affects those three pieces. One is labor, maintenance, truck utilization that every trucking company in America deals with. And the other is just where are the chassis? Right? There's a chassis shortage, can't get chassis. You've got big shippers that are, you've got chassis companies that are taking chassis back off leases from mid-market companies, and they won't tell you this, but they're giving them away to some of the biggest importers in the world. And so you've got kind of games going with the chassis pools right now too.
So how do you commonly get your information? Is it what's the data form? Is it
Email?
The email?
It's email. Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. Welcome
So
to
there's
1996.
And
all
what
email.
about information? What about information? How do you get your information on chassis specifically?
Yeah, there's not really any good chassis utilization stuff out there. You're typically looking at boxes, right? You're looking at where's the box and is it empty or is it full? Because you know that every box is sitting on wheels, right?
Right.
So if you track the container and whether the container is empty or full, you know when it's got to go back. So we, at least for us, and maybe somebody on this call that's smarter than me will be able to teach me something, but we're typically looking at the containers because that's what's either going to cost us or the customer money in terms of detention and demurrage.
Okay. A lot of elements that need to be kept up with.
You got to think about it. There's not a chassis sitting empty anywhere in the country. Everything has a box on it. So you're watching the boxes, right? So I got to have an empty container to take back to the port so that I can use those wheels to get something out.
Kristen, do you want to?
Sir, I'm going to suggest that since we're 22 minutes in, that we go to the next series of presenters, let them get all of their remarks in, and then loop back with some themes.
Okay, let's go with Will and Jarrett. I know both of you are on, so a little bit of where you're from and then anything you want to present.
Jarrett, you want to go first?
Yes, I can go first. My name is Jarrett Cooper with BW and Mitchum Trucking. We are a family-owned operated company out of Charleston, South Carolina. We specialize in overweight and refrigerated containers, and the majority of our business is drayage, a combination of local and regional work in the Southeast. Overall, I think we have a problem of a lack of efficiency across the board. The driver's not as efficient. They're not working as much as he mentioned previously, that you have 100 drivers, you don't know what's going to show up each day. You have drivers chasing the different companies, so you're not getting your full maximization out of the drivers. You have efficiency issues in the port just from sheer volume or processes. The warehouses are not unloading the containers, which are holding up the chassis, therefore creating the chassis shortage. I think that if you were continuing a rapid pace of unloading, then you would have the chassis needed to turn in empties, pull out your next load, or vice versa. And then it just creates all the way down. You have a lack of help in your offices. You can't get mechanics to work on the equipment. Your trucks are down longer in shops. All the way across the board, it seems like there's just a lack of efficiency that if we could start attacking one piece at a time, you might make it a little bit better. As far as the information goes, he hit the nail on the head before that we just have to track so much information across multiple platforms. There's not a single stop shop where we can get what we need, and it's very manual and requires lots of people to go through to make sure that you're providing your customers, they provide you with information and expect you to take it from there and protect their interest and minimize their cost. When we get a container, we start tracking vessel ETAs. We want to know when they actually arrive on dock and that they're released and ready to go. We need to know when the last free day is. We need to know when the cutoff is for exports. If a box is in demurrage, we need to be able to clear that demurrage in a timely fashion. The per diem comes a lot on the trucking companies. And so when you get a per diem, then you have a process of having to fight that and dispute it along the way. And it's just so much of this just takes up manual labor, and it's hard to automate it. And I think that if you had a system where you could get real-time updates on ETAs, which a lot of our port system gives us an update of the ETA, but you have to go look for it. We have a system where we know when things can arrive and release, but you have to follow the process and input information. But we struggle around here for finding out last free days and cutoffs. Usually we have to go to our customers and request that information, and it's all by email. And next thing you know, your level of emails are astronomical, that you end up missing emails. You end up making mistakes along the way because loads are getting confused between which loads you're working on. And then you have the availability of containers. So if we could see container inventories, we haul refrigerated cargo. If we have containers, but we don't have gen sets. Being able to see that stuff helps us become more efficient in our operation. Once it gets in our domain, we can work it to each individual company the best way we know how to make it efficient, but we require that information from everybody else. And being able to streamline that would be a huge help. Right now, we have customers that come to us to have boxes into merge. I say, great, send it over to me in the next 30 minutes. I'll pull it today and deliver tomorrow. But they can't get it. They can't get the containers cleared for 2 days, and therefore I've had to move my driver on, and they lost that capacity. And those delays, those half a day delays, really affect us when we're living by the minute of what we can do. Loads cancel and shift, and we have a driver and we want to maximize them, but we have to have loads ready to go at that time.
Mm-hmm. So information there would be helpful.
Yeah, and being able to get it quickly and get the problems resolved, because if everything went great, we wouldn't have a problem. We get the container, it comes off as good, but it's only when there's issues that ties up time. And if I have 100 drivers, I want to book 100 loads. I want everybody maximizing, so I have to account for drivers falling off, and I have to account for loads that are not available. And if I have that consistently happening, a driver shows up to work and we don't have work for him, either I have to pay him or he goes home, and that creates frustration upon drivers, and they're going to go where they can work and work steady every day and not have to deal with those frustrations.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn, just to make sure we plow through everyone's information before we go back. I'm going to turn it over to Will to give your views.
Thank you. My name is Will Connell. I'm president of Gulf Intermodal Services. We're part of IMC Companies. As IMC Companies, we operate about 2,200 trucks in 38 locations nationwide. And as Gulf Intermodal Services, I oversee 300 of those trucks throughout the Gulf region. To specifically speak to the questions on the agenda that you put out, what are the data elements that are integral to your operations? It's the basic things that we're all looking for. On the imports, we need to know the steamship line, the vessel status, the container availability, the release status. When is the equipment going to be released? Is it on hold? If it's on hold, why? The container size, the last free day, and any demurrage information. Surprisingly, some of our ports provide the last free day information either on their website or through other means, but many of them do not. And so you're left with trying to contact the steamship line or calculate it based on the date it became available yourself to figure out when your last free day is to pull it out. On the export side, we need to know the equipment, empty equipment availability, the document cut date, the earliest receivable date when we can turn the box back in, and then the cutoff date, the last date and time that we can turn it in. So I like to think of it simply as the life cycle of the box. When can I pull the empty out? When do I have to have the docks back? When's the earliest I can turn it in? When is the last time I can turn it in? What are our appointment availabilities by location and the status of those? Chassis availability needed by pool, by size, and by location. Per diem, free time, and rates. We get it from the steamship lines, but we don't get it generally from a beneficial cargo owner if they have a separate contract. And then interchange documentation details for each container and chassis in any port, rail, or CY facility. Question 2, what are the data gaps? What are you not currently getting that would improve our efficiency? We have very poor information on chassis availability. We don't really know on a given day when we start our day if the chassis are going to be available at the port. So a lot of carriers run 100% pool chassis. Some carriers like us run a mixture of our own chassis and pool chassis, and there are a few carriers that run 100% of their own chassis. But if you're your typical carrier that's running a pool chassis and you start your day, you don't know when you arrive at the port of the rail if there's going to be a chassis available for you to make that move. So typically you're going to try to go in with an empty or load so you can free up that chassis and generate it. That's pretty common across the country now. It used to be there was an abundance of chassis. And so, for example, in the Houston market, we could just send a driver in, and if he was, dropping off a 20, he could drop that chassis and then pick up a 40 and grab another chassis at the port. That's much harder to do today, and we don't really get any consistent data telling us what chassis will or will not be available. As a side note, there's not a intermodal driver directory on the port side that's consistent like there is on the rail side through IANA that tracks which drivers are allowed to use each carrier's SCAT code. So that creates an opportunity if someone knows your SCAT code, depending on how each port manages that, you can have someone get out with the wrong container. Next question, how do we get the data from other parts of the supply chain, whether it's EDI or email? We do a lot through websites. I would say that's really the first rudimentary process where a CSR is manually pulling the data from the port terminal. Your second process is web scraping, where someone is going in and writing a program to basically run a bot, so to speak, and go into the terminal website and pull that data that you need to put into your system. That's a cumbersome process that taxes the terminal system, and it's prone to failure anytime somebody makes a change to the website and the terminal operators don't like us doing it. But a lot of our automated data retrieval comes through that process. There's very little EDI, and then API interfaces are beginning to become an option. We currently have 4 terminals that we're set up doing API with. ITS in Long Beach Container Terminal, Port of Houston through their Navis operating system, and TradePack. I really would like to point out to the Commission the Port of Houston and the way they're using their Navis system as a standard that could be looked at. And for me, I think one of the best opportunities we could achieve here is if we could find a way to get to a standard data set that the FMC requires the steamship line and terminals to make available to all dray carriers. For example, we're interfacing in Houston now through the Navis system with the Port of Houston, and everything that would normally be pulled manually via email or tracing on their website automatically comes into our system for our customer service team to see and operate with. We don't even have to pull an interchange from the port and scan it into our system. We're able to pull that data and create that interchange directly through the system. The last question that was there is how do you provide data to your customers? And it's kind of the same as with the ports. We're either updating them via email or via phone. We're using automated emails or reports as the customer requests. Any customer can go to our website if they have 2 data elements and pull information. So if they know a bill of lading and a container number, they can track and trace that container. Or for a direct customer that wants it, we give them a web portal with a login where they can go in and access far more details directly through our system. But again, in conclusion, if I was going to pick, really 2 key points to make, where do I think we don't have the data that we need? I would say on the chassis availability. And then if I was going to say where do we need the best help with data transmission and access, I would say trying to create some sort of standardized API process similar to how we've done with some of the terminals like the one we have here in Houston, through their Navis operating system, where we can pull every piece of data that we need on that shipment electronically. And every time the steamship line makes an update, the port makes an update, it's automatically fed as an update into our system.
That was a great presentation. I really appreciate that. You gave us a lot of data elements to look at and listed them out there concretely. So that's very helpful. I did want to ask a question of Jared. You mentioned the issue related to, we've seen a lot of distribution centers being set up now, and large shippers are using these distribution centers. And you said that you're not aware of when they're open or going to be accepting cargo right now, and I know the warehouses are all full. But would it be helpful if some of these larger distribution centers had requirements to post when they were accepting cargo loads?
I think it's more on the side of we deliver the containers to the warehouse and we drop them in a drop hook scenario, and you just don't know when they'll unload them, but you have to get them out the port to stop the charges, stop the merge and those charges. So they want you to pull them and take them to them, and they're unloading as fast as they can, as fast as they can get stuff out the door. But if they can't get it unloaded and out, it sits on their yard. And where a customer I would normally have maybe a pool of 30 containers that we rotated through every day, every other day, they have a pool of 150 containers. So they're tying up, 120 extra chassis that they didn't 2 years ago.
Okay. So to make it more efficient, not only would you have to know that they were open, but that they were pulling cargo actively and that you could get in line.
Yes, I mean, you need to know if they can get things unloaded, you can bring more to them, but at some point you just get gridlocked. If you don't have an empty container to return where you can reuse the chassis, you can't pull a load out, and you literally become gridlocked where you can't move any cargo until somebody produces an empty or an export load ready to turn in for you. Vessel delays. I could load a group of containers, and a vessel could be delayed, and we not know about that until we get them loaded. And then I can't turn them in. I have to sit them on my yard until the vessel opens up at the terminal.
Okay.
That's the
ERD. But there's that. Yeah, there's value on the distribution center side of having more information about when they're affirmatively moving cargo and emptying things out.
Yes.
Okay.
But I can tell you on the distro side, we want to unload it. We don't want it to sit. Like, we want to unload it. We want the building to flow. So now you have a problem with the customer who gives you a forecast, and then they don't sell things, or they don't meet their forecast. And now I've got stuff sitting in my warehouse, and I got other stuff coming in that I can't unload. There's a whole, like, one of the things you have is customers that have gone from just in time to, oh my God, and they've bought things that they're not selling. They're sitting on tons of inventory. And like, I mean, to the gentleman who was talking, like, I would love to unload it. There are times where I have empty stacked on my yard, and I'm calling my customer going, hey man, like, you need to fulfill on the cycle you said you were going to fulfill, because I got to unload your stuff. I can't unload your stuff until you sell what you said you were going to sell, because the building's got to flow.
Yeah.
So it's just another one of those things. Like, the information would be nice, but we don't have it. Right.
So anyways, we're going to go through the next three, Tom, Heimgartner, and then Robert. I apologize. I had conflicting information. Robert Loya, Chief Operating Officer, TGS Logistics. Eric Wright, Vice President, Washington Trucking Association. And Tom, if you could start off. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Best Transportation, and then we'll take it from there. Tom, we got you. Are you on mute, or did you have to drop? Okay, maybe we'll go to Robert. Just Robert, if you could start off, and we'll see if we can locate Tom in the in room.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I couldn't get logged on to the Microsoft Teams. There's really a lot of good information that was presented, and I think there's, for the exception, because I operate in LA, Long Beach, and Oakland, and LA, Long Beach is such a different monster than most gateways across the country, although a lot of everything that was already stated happens here, but amplified. And it makes it much more difficult. I mean, all the stuff that we need it's been pointed out. Unfortunately, it takes us, about 20 websites to get all that information. There's just so many terminals down here and so many steamship lines, and all the onerous direction that they're giving you. Oh, you have to get an empty from this group. It's the same company, but and they won't forward it to that group. You have to now send a new email. So it's very onerous. For all the reasons that everyone's pointed out. Obviously, we have to deal with appointment systems, which was another big hurdle down here in LA, Long Beach, that's really causing a big problem. As you well know, there's no chassis. There's tons of empties everywhere, roughly about 130,000 empties, and there's nowhere to take our empties now. And so, the onerous task of protecting the BCO, protecting the trucking company, we really like a single portal to be able to get all this information in more of a push environment, right? So if I enter a container number that I picked up out of one terminal, it'll tell me, nope, these in this one single environment, it'll say the appointments for that are available at this terminal, but that's not how it works. We have to go find it, and it's very time consuming. And like I said, I'm not going to talk about all the inbound side. We're heavy exporters. I come out of the Central Valley, although my previous life, I was 99.9% importers here at Cal Cartage before I moved over to TGS, and we're heavy exporters out of the Central Valley. So we go up to Oakland and we go down to LA, and then we're from Reno to Oakland as well. So the booking issue is a big issue right now. Obviously, there's no stability in the vessel schedules, which makes it extremely difficult to plan. We like to plan anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. As soon as we pick up an empty, to load, we're trying to immediately the same day, trying to get an appointment to return that thing. It could happen, it could not happen, who knows, but we're trying to secure an appointment. Otherwise, you're sitting on containers that are loaded and under your wheels. And so that is a big problem. I think they pointed out chassis being an issue. That's a significant thing here. There's a few terminals now, working through our associations, that we've been asking for transparency there. Although it's a union jurisdictional issue down here, where they do actually do a physical count every day, the union does, and then they report it to the management sends it out. So you're looking about 8:30, 9 o'clock before you even see that, and your drivers are already on the road. So you're kind of hoping that you'll find a chassis and hoping that you have some information that is actually valuable and usable, which makes it extremely difficult. But from our perspective, the appointment problem is significant. We advocated for that several years ago, back on the FMC teams that we were part of. Although they're using them in a punitive manner, if you don't protect yourself with screen prints and using third-party software, that's because the terminals don't want to do it, and the steamship lines don't want to do it, the ports don't want to do it, because they're here in LA, Long Beach, they don't talk to each other, or they don't want to share the same common platform because of customer relationships, et cetera. So there's a lot of dynamics going on here that make it extremely difficult. There's everything that everyone pointed out, from APIs to EDIs to emails, everything that's how we get our information, right? But we need it in a central portal, especially when you're dealing with the steamship lines, who are very onerous, and they're saying you have to send it to 10 different departments. When I send an email to one and they're telling me I can't, and well, now you're paying to merge, or per diem, excuse me. So it's unreasonable, without a doubt. We've made it extremely complicated here in the LA Long Beach gateway. Although we move a ton of freight, I think you pointed that out earlier, nearly 20 million TEUs, but it's not without a lot of heartache. I can promise you that. So we'll continue to push and fight for all that stuff. There's nothing new that I won't, Mr. Bensel, that I would be adding, other than the appointment stuff that no one else pointed out, because we are so entrenched with imports, exports, and empty appointments. We all have to match.
Okay. Tom, are you there now? Tom Heimgartner? He was on earlier. Well, then we'll go to Eric from Washington Trucking Association.
Thank you, Commissioner Bensel, for hosting this panel today. My name is Eric Wright. I'm a vice president with the Washington Trucking Association. Before joining the Washington Trucking Association, I spent several years in a variety of capacities in international trade. I've heard many great comments today, and they sound very similar to the comments I hear from members every day. I'd like to break the conversation, though, a little bit and talk about kind of the two different categories of data that we see. One is transactional, and the other one is operational. Transactional being ERD dates, container numbers, appointment times. Operational being things like how to use a peel pile, how to pay for long stay charges, what to do when there's a damage to the container. The transactional data for the marine terminals is actually quite well understood. We could create long lists of the individual data points, but we all are using essentially the same data every day. One of the chief challenges with that data is the lack of standardization and the inability to connect systems because of that lack of standardization. Every data point has to tell two stories. One is it has to have the attributes. You know, is it alphanumeric and special characters? Is it alphanumeric? Can the alphas only be in certain sections of the field, so on and so forth? And the other one is the context of that data. And so, for example, that I'll use it. If you put the numbers 310 down, that could mean March 10th, it could mean 3 foot 10 inches, or it could mean 3:10 in the afternoon. You have to know the context behind it. You know, there could be some lessons learned from CBP with their CATER that they used as part of the rollout of the ACE portal, and looking at how to do that. But that really is going to be, I think, one of the principal things that has to be done in order to allow the high-speed data systems that are going to be needed in the future. And it's worth pointing out, in order to get a container, you still have to have equipment and somebody to operate that equipment. The data is only going to make us better at doing that, but it's only half of the equation in the conversation. I think we have to remember that when we start talking about operational data. One of the other challenges that we face is that there's a lack of defined principal data ownership. Who owns the ERD date? Who is responsible for that date and making sure that date is accurate? That is a real big conversation that's happening, at least here in the Pacific Northwest. And that's followed by, you know, when you go to set up these systems, who is responsible for bearing the cost of that? You know, we have several members who have data connections to the terminals, but they actually pay a fee to use those data systems. And so how does that play out? How do we make these systems available to the most number of people possible, and under what paradigm does that happen? It's critical to remember, at least here in this gateway, the vast majority of the trucking companies that are providing service to the gateway are quite small. And so to ask a 10 truck operator to go buy a TMS system and to set it up with an API connection. And oh, by the way, the data that's coming out of that connection has to go through some sort of transformation before you can use it in your system because it's not formatted properly. I mean, that's just a lift that your average small company can't do, either economically or technologically. And so if we want to get them to be more efficient, I think we really have to focus on some of those types of things. When you get to the operational side, that can be just as important. You know, as truckers, we are interacting with these terminals on a day-to-day basis. And so commonly we have already established all of the logins and criteria in order to get the information, but often our customers haven't. And so when we go to a terminal and something goes wrong, and then we have to explain to a customer what's happening and they have questions, with at least some terminals here in this gateway, they can't actually access that information. They can't access the how to go about doing something because it's behind a login. And yes, granted, a lot of times they could go get a login, but that takes time. And one of the things that we often don't have is time. The life cycle of data in the drayage industry is very short. An OBL number, when it's cut in, say, Asia, you know, that number is going to exist for 4 to 6 weeks, most likely. An ERD date may exist for less than a day. So our data systems have to be very high speed, and that is where email, quite frankly, has come to rule the day. It is enormously flexible. Everybody understands it. You can provide all the context you want, but it's also incredibly inefficient. Dispatchers receiving, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of emails a day, trying to stitch together the game of three-dimensional chess that we all play every day, trying to match appointments, container availability, chassis availability, so on and so forth. And it's really getting that ecosystem to be more in line in some sort of a standardized format. You know, it could go a lot of different ways. You could have a centralized repository. You could keep more of a dispersed type system. I will say that trucking is one of the really interesting components in the international supply chains for a lot of reasons, not the least of which it is the only component that doesn't run point to point. All of the other components run fixed point to fixed point, marine terminal to marine terminal, airport to airport, railroad hub to railroad hub. A dispatcher may dispatch a truck to a local move one day and a long haul move the following day, depending on what's going on. We have an enormous amount of variability in our operations. And so every time there's a constraint that's put in place, whether it is an appointment system or a lack of data or whatever that constraint, it creates an enormous amount of friction in the system. So, you know, I think that's one of the things that also has to be brought up here is it's not just good enough to talk about the transactional data. How do we, that's actually, I think, a really simple problem to solve. You know, somebody can write a data standard in, you know, a reasonably short period of time and then, you know, put that in and get that implemented. But we also have an operational data standard that we need to start looking at. There's no centralized place on every marine terminals operator's website that you can go to that explains to you how to get in, how to get out, where to go, who to contact, all those types of things that become really, really important. And it's also worth noting some of my members still get faxes. So, I mean, as much as we've come so far, you know, there's still people out there that are working in that kind of a situation. On the conversation about chassis, I've always found it interesting, and I continue to find it interesting that when chassis is provided as part of an ocean bill of lading, the container is considered released whether a chassis is available or not. And that just, it's for some reason that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in my world, in the way I think at least. And so I think, you know, we get back to this whole thing can be summed up and we need to kind of reduce the amount of uncertainty in the system. And we need to be looking for ways to create standardized processes that can be used as building blocks. We don't necessarily, I think, want to create a system in which it's too onerous, because one of the great things about trucking and the trucking community is it's a lot of really inventive, creative, kind of asymmetrical thinking people that figure out interesting problems. But we do need to make sure that we provide them with the tools to be more efficient in what they do, and they're provided in a way that is obtainable for the average trucker. And so I think that's where your conversations that you've been having around, you know, creating some sort of standardized format is a really powerful conversation. I really hope to see you continue that.
So your comment on operational was one that was resonated to me, and so you're talking about like when they're going to do peel piles and the policies that the terminals are utilizing to accept cargo and function and allow you to deal with them. Is that correct? Exactly.
Yeah. It's you know, as a lot of times as truckers, we like I said, we have access to the information. We may have to go to different places. We may have to dig it up. We may have to email somebody. But if you're a broker or an importer or a small exporter, I cannot just send you a link for most of the terminals and say, here, this is how this works. These are the people you need to contact, or these are the challenges I'm facing. And so that alone creates an inefficiency in the system, just with that additional need for communication and things that have to happen in the background. The educational component, we as truckers spend a lot of time educating importers and exporters about what's happening in the terminals and why it's happening at the terminals and what they have to do in order to help us get through our day working with the terminals.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about I was so focused on the transactional that sometimes you forget that there's more to it than just data element, but operational policies and how they're going to be implemented. So is Tom there, or do we lose him? Carl, do you know if he's still on? Or John, do you have access to that? Well, do we have Tom Heimgartner? Okay, he must have had to drop off. So a lot of good ideas. I think what we do have is a pretty solid list of transactional elements that we should look at. The operational stuff, I think, was a good thing that we need to focus on. And so, Kristen, did you have some questions?
I think I had sort of one question that we might want to address through sort of a lightning roundup. Will, I think, did a great job of identifying a best practice or two, namely with his conversation about Houston. For the other speakers, and then back to Will again, if you have additional suggestions, are there any sort of best practices that you've come across that you think we should pay particular attention to? And we can start with Michael.
So I was looking for my mute button. 2 years in a pandemic, you think I'd know where the little microphone button is by now, right? I think to go back to, and I apologize, I didn't catch your name, what the operator from California was talking about. I don't know that there's any singular best practice as much as it is establishing a standard. I don't know that there is a best practice. I think as operators, we've done our best to figure out our own internal best practices of managing fragmented and disparate data, if that's fair. But I think it'd be really helpful for the steamship lines, the operating community, whether it's through associations like what Mr. Wright represents, to say, hey, like, look, can we just agree on a standard? Whether we want to, use fancy words like blockchain that may or may not exist someday, or just get on some APIs, whatever it is. The gentleman from Gulf mentioned the Navis system in Houston. APM Terminals is doing some cool things in Mobile, but it's all different, right? And so when you're a national operator, like an IMC, geez, think about how many chassis they touch. And if you have an operator like IMC who has probably some of the densest information when it comes to intermodal and ocean terminals of anybody in the country, and they're saying that, I don't know that there's a best practice as much as it is a coming together and collaborating. And I think that's, if you think about something like, we haven't talked about supply chain in the 17 years that I've been doing this. We've talked about imports, and we've talked about trucking, and we've talked about LTL. Now all of a sudden we want to talk about supply chain. If you look at the biggest BCOs in the world, those are still distinct departments that don't talk. International is managed different from transportation. They're bid separately. And so I think a best practice could be just how do you get to the table and collaborate and create some standards.
Great, thank you.
Robert,
Jarrett? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead. You got it.
Let's go with Jarrett and then teeing up Robert after that.
Okay, yeah, I'll go quickly. I don't think there is one best practice you could go with. We know the information that we need. It needs to be standardized because we all have access to it some way or another. It's just how we get it and how difficult it is to get it. Simplifying that would be the best practice. Holding the stakeholders accountable to provide that information in a centralized place or in a place where you can access it, I think would be a best practice. We are on the back end of it where we risk getting charged if we don't do our jobs properly, but we have to have that information. So like I said, there's not, I don't think, a single one. In the Port of Charleston, we have a great website that we can go to that the port does give us a lot of this information. They stepped up and we can access it, but it's not all of it, and it's not all in one place. We do still have to go to outside portals or websites to gain information that they don't provide, and they probably shouldn't provide because it's a steamship line information that they need to give us. But, best practice would be, I would agree, just put it all in one place and get a standard of what has to be provided to us in order to start our efficiencies on our end.
Great, thank you. Robert and then Eric.
Sure. I think it's been stated pretty well. Standardization is key, but I will say, because the gateways are so different, landlord ports versus, port authorities, et cetera, I think it has to be specialized by gateway. But it definitely has to be standardized by gateway, whatever that may be, and what it looks like. I absolutely agree. For here, that we got TTI and LBCT are very, at least LBCT has always been in the forefront of integration, and sharing data, never fully transparent. TTI's website is pretty darn good. It's very simple. And then, you know, I think that sometimes we try to overcomplicate things, but I think we need to make sure it's standardized by gateway and if possible, get it into a single portal that is more proactive, that pushes versus, you know, reactive and people having to go pull data.
Excellent, thank you. Eric, and then back to Will.
I mean, I'm going to echo what has already been said a lot. I don't know that you can point to a single best standard for any given gateway or best practice for any given gateway. I will say in our particular gateway, to their credit, the Northwest Seaport Alliance about 5 years ago established a quarterly meeting where the trucking community and the BCOs and the chassis community all kind of come together and you know, talk some issues through. Sometimes it's very effective, sometimes not, but I think that could be potentially a best practice. And as far as just opening the lines of communications, those meetings have evolved over the years, but I would agree that trying to create a single standard that would work nationwide is probably very problematic given the great number of diversities that we face in this industry.
Once you've seen one port, you've seen one port, right?
Yes, exactly.
I agree with both those comments.
Thanks,
Well,
Will.
You know, that's the problem. All the ports are different. It's not, the data is the same. And, you know, it really would not be that hard for the commission to go out and look at some of the terminals that are cutting edge with this and establish with a few key industry leaders what is the standard data. As draymen, we all need the same data and to handle our shipments. And this isn't a competitive advantage. This needs to be something that is done to keep drivers in our industry so we can continue to move cargo and trying to make our processes easier. We heard a lot today about email being the standard. If email is the standard, we're in trouble. And, you know, the CSRs, the dispatchers, they can't keep up. And that's where errors happen. And it's inefficient. We're not moving the cargo. We have to figure out how to do more with less. And so if we can come up with a standardized process, which I'm convinced can be done, and then require the steamship lines and the terminal operators to make that data available, we can work out whether it's, you know, EDI and some type of push or it's API. You know, that's getting into IT technicalities. But the key is you have a standard set that everybody makes available. Just within the Gulf, in 3 markets, in Mobile, New Orleans, and Houston, I deal with very different data sets that are made available. Houston does a great job with the Port Authority. You know, I would say theirs is cutting edge and they work great with the dray community. The other 2 markets, not as much. And, you know, we can't even get them to give us the chassis number on an interchange going in and out of the port. And so how do you audit your bills if you can't get a chassis interchange? So we've got to have a standard. We've got to streamline it. We got to move away from email and feed it into the system. One final comment I'll make, you know, it's easy for me to say as a larger carrier where we have our own IT systems, we can build the technology to make these links, but the process is not that complicated. And most reasonably sized draymen are going to, if they don't have their own in-house TMS, they're going to outsource to a common industry provider, Inboss, Profit Tools, somebody, Trinium out there that can build these interfaces to the ports once the standard is set. And you could work fairly quickly to get a large percentage of your draymen in the country that are automating the system between the port terminals and their systems. And I go back to what Commissioner Dye said at the opening of the last meeting: get the right data to the right person at the right time, and the process will move more efficiently.
Well, that sounds like a really good point to end at right there. And we've talked about it's not just getting data; it's getting data that's usable, that can allow people to do their jobs better. And so probably have to have it on an iPhone ultimately. So I really appreciate your participation in this. I think we may reach back out individually after we review what was said and what was presented here today to you. If you're interested, you can provide any information that you want. Talk about using emails. We're using one here, but maritime data at fmc.gov, and we're taking public comment from anybody who wants to provide it. And if you, the participants today, wanted to present anything formally, you're welcome to use that. We're going to post everything related to this presentation online, and I know that we'll have some follow-up as we go through the process, but we are looking at establishing a standard here for information. Really, at this point, the alternative is just not acceptable. We have to do better in the movement of cargo, and there's a lot of cargo coming in. And I know we've actually delivered record numbers of supplies into the country, but I talked to so many different segments, economic segments, that are impacted by slowdown, and you recognize that the cost of coming into compliance with more efficient standards and technologies to maximize our limitations and space are de minimis compared to the cost to our economy of not doing it. So we're going to continue to work towards seeing what sort of information that we can get back to you to review to see if this is the sort of standard that would serve the industry and moving forward more efficiently. But I really appreciate the time and energy that you've spent today with us, and look forward to talking again. Thanks, and that's it for the first meeting. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In meeting protocol.